I am so thankful today that Kevin Tate has agreed to be our speaker, called on short notice, but his response was so great. And so today we want to welcome Kevin, who is a lifelong storyteller, an avid reader, and a freelance writer. He is the senior creative mentor. And I asked him, what is that? At Mavis Agency in Tupelo, and has produced a weekly outdoor page for the Daily Journal for 11 years. He and his wife, Amy, have 2 children, Avery, who's 17 and will be graduating this year, and Walker, who is 14. Please welcome our speaker, Kevin Tate.
Thank y'all for having me. Let me see if I can get myself centered up on Zoom here. I spend most of my days either Zooming or Google Meeting, it feels like. So, it's also gratifying to hear the involvement with Rotary of the microbrewers. It's certainly an interesting locale for that. I grew up in the Methodist Church, which means I'm allowed to ask the blessing with a beer in my hand. So it's a little bit different set of rules. But again, I appreciate y'all having me here today. I have been doing an outdoors page for the Daily Journal for quite a long time, and it's a real pleasure for me. I do creative work professionally, full-time for a living, and because of the nature of those projects, they're always a team effort. We use the very best talent available to us to accomplish everything we do. And any given project may have 5 to 25 people's hands on it. And that's very satisfying and rewarding. But as far as creative outlets go, I had always felt like I was lacking something. And there was something that could be better in my life as far as just being overall happier with what I get to do. So the Daily Journal was very kind to welcome my outdoors page a number of years ago, October of 2010. And it lets me do a project from soup to nuts. Whatever I think of, I can do. They've been very, very welcoming to my ideas. I'm the opposite of micromanaged there, and I've just really enjoyed doing it. And one of maybe the chief thing that it allows me to do is to share my ideas and my passions for the outdoors. Through my features and my roundups, I try to keep as much knowledge on the front burner of things that you can do, things that are available to be done in the outdoors. And through my column, it gives me all the latitude remaining that I might care to use. And one of the things I try to communicate through my columns, and I'm going to inflict a reading of a few of them on you here today, through my columns is to communicate a little bit about the joy and the hope that's there to be shared in the outdoors. Life is good about keeping some sort of difficulty always coming by. There's never any way to be completely done with everything that might hurt us, but there's a perspective to be gained through time spent outdoors. On one of the first cool mornings of Mississippi's fall, a small hunter put on his camo, picked up his rifle, and headed to the woods. He didn't have far to go, for his morning stand was close, and he had come so very far already. Sometimes small packages hold the largest things, it seems. Brody Hope's heart alone must weigh at least 1,000 pounds. The brave little guy, whose last name is pronounced like Hope plus a T, recently finished enough trips to St. Jude to last 100 lifetimes. Standing waist high in a group of adults, he remains a child in so many ways, but he's matured through a phase of life most men will never know. Last fall, he hunted deer on Monroe County's Lenore Plantation through the generosity of the property's owners, the Carnell family, and through the devices of the Healthcare Foundation of North Mississippi, the nonprofit, which is the fundraising arm of the North Mississippi Medical Center, supports cancer patients going through therapy with the sorts of things insurance doesn't cover. Its employees are paid by the hospital. Every dime raised goes to those it's meant to help. Last spring, the group wanted to expand their horizons and give an outdoor experience to someone who would appreciate it. Last summer, Brody was in the thick of his fight with cancer. Among the principals in the group's fundraising efforts lies a core of lifelong friends who'd grown up hunting west of Highway 45 and south of Evans Road, and they knew the first place they wanted their guests to go. It was a place not too far from Brody's home in Dorsey. It seemed the table was set with the right thing to do, and it could not have turned out any better. Water and the woods were where Brody's dad took him on the better days of the struggle. They got him away from fluorescent lights, medicines, and the paging calls of hospital intercoms that live at the apex of mankind's knowledge, strongholds of skill that rescue life in an environment that can't help wearing the spirit away. The Healthcare Foundation of North Mississippi supports the Take a Swing Against Cancer fundraising event. And those, the doctors, nurses, and staff who provide and sometimes receive the treatment delivered through needles and tubes, through surgery and machines, they inspire and are inspired by the optimism of those laboring through the darkest shadows of the biggest fights of their lives. They rejoice in supporting the foundation, not because cancer is bad, but because the human heart is good, those of the patients, their families, their own. Saturday morning, on a deep, warm couch at Lenore, 4-year-old Collins Ray Hope played with toys, watched cartoons, and stirred up an imaginary concoction in a mixing bowl, blending water and flour with sugar and hot peppers. Her older brother, who had fought so hard, was resting his way through a casual hunt on the other side of fields nearby. At twice her age, her brother, who'd become a young hero to many, was still just Broby to her. Their mom, Leanne, watched the little dynamo of sunshine while her husband, Andy, hunted beside their son. What stresses a mother knows for her children, guarding the innocence of the one, standing by the battles of the other, watching both grow through their years of Santa Claus and the Easter Bunny, of bubbling laughter and crayon creations, construction paper happies cut by the smallest of hands. In the clear light of a Mississippi Saturday, or on any fall morning before the deer bed down, Brody may peer through the trees or along a lane and spot his next whitetail, or cast a line and catch his next bass. For because of those doctors, because of the medicines in the fluorescent lit places, because of the woods and water he visited between, because of the grace that reaches to both, today he is cancer-free. It's been an odd season here, warm and dry, but Brody knows there's little good to be done sitting in the house. Fall is a time to be outside, out in the quiet places where the wild critters roam and God's voice is best heard. The season is open and it's time to go. Conditions could be better, but more than any other, he has already seen there's always hope, plus a T. So the things that the outdoors afford us are limitless. The only limit is our own imagination, the things that we hold ourselves back, the devices we use to excuse our fear of trying and our desire not to give it a shot. But overall, it puts us in a position to really explore the freedoms our country allows us and live the lives we might even never imagine. He threw back the tent flap and stepped forward 140 years into the bright sunshine of the present day. He wore canvas cowboy pants held up by suspenders, a long underwear shirt decorated with the remnants of countless past adventures, and a battered felt hat that had seen many, many days, better and otherwise. I was a guest at a hunting camp on the high plains of New Mexico. The camp lay hard by a 2-track road, an hour's drive from the pavement, a 100-mile round trip from the nearest water. I assumed the character I'd spotted was in costume on hire to entertain, but learned he was in his usual attire and on hire to cook. We were set to be there 3 full days, but our party tagged out in 1.5. Hanging around camp for the balance, we learned the cook who dressed like a character actually was one, and not one of the make-believe variety. John, who never offered his last name, looked to be 70 or so and had tales that spanned every continent and hallmark of history. From the Alaskan oil field to the Panama Canal to the glory days of Hollywood and the Sunset Strip, Don's stories fell into a realm of believability that only exists in hunting camps. I'd learned from my own old men not to expect all stories told for the truth to be as solid as sworn testimony, but rather to judge their value by the intent of their telling. If the teller is the hero of every yarn, chances are they're mostly lying. For what part of life does more than make fools of us all? Don's stories weren't of the doing or of the deed, but of the experience. Like fine oil on plain canvas, the Western panoramas that flowed from brush and blade felt crisp and majestic, more real than reality somehow, just like the West. Its hot red sandstone and high blue skies, a world of hard contrast and soft edges, dotted with yucca and low cactus, kissed by a wind that shakes hope as it rattles through desert spoon. Don had enjoyed what he'd done, and he enjoyed telling his stories. Whether the stories coincided with things he'd actually done was a point never in need of determination. I can say his cooking was excellent. With an utter minimum of equipment and utilities, he prepared meats that seemed to have a Central American flair. He turned canned vegetables into the kind of dish that would be welcome in an oil field camp on top of the world. He turned a little cinnamon and sugar into the kind of late night turned morning fare that found its footing in the Southern California 50 years ago. Along all the turns of life's road, real or imagined, Don had indisputably learned to cook well in a challenging environment. With spring returning and on the days when it does not rain, when anything seems possible and probably is, I think of Don and his stories, of how many times he's decided what to be and gone to be it. Whether our dreams may lie, the road from here to there is open. Don's wayfaring testimony is certainly testament to that. So what I always hope to communicate is that life is 100% what we make of it. Reduced to its simplest parameters, it may not seem like much. It may seem like another day to drag ourselves out of the bed to go make money to pay bills that have it already spent. And I think all of us fall into that rut sometimes of looking at it that way. But we owe it to ourselves and to the great gifts we've been granted to make ourselves purposefully step back and look at what can be found in the cheerful corners of life, if only we would try to see. The boy straightened up in the bed of the pickup, having just finished stacking firewood next to camping supplies, between tents and beside water buckets. Then he put both hands on one bed rail, did a handstand, and landed on the ground on his feet. I'd give that a 7.4, the old man said. Good dismount technique, but not much difficulty. How long have you been judging athletics? The boy asked. Oh, I just started, the old man said, but I'm in my prime for observing. So I think I'll keep it up. I'm in my prime for observing, and you're in your prime for performing, which makes the timing just right. You're about 12 now, and that's the peak of prime for a boy. How old are you? The boy asked. Old enough to appreciate the value of observing more than performing, the old man said. When your performing days are done, you'll have a long time to look forward to your observing days, which is good because it means you'll appreciate them when they come along. What do you have to look forward to? The boy asked. Oh, I'd expect a good many more years of watching you perform, he said. Pickup bed stunts are just a sideline. It's about time for you to take up the role of front seat trot line handler full time. That's a job that looks like more fun than it is, the boy said. I knew you'd make a good observer one day, the old man said. Well, I appreciate y'all being patient with me, and I always am thrilled to hear anybody likes reading the columns. It's just a real pleasure to do, and I treasure the Daily Journal's venue they offer me. Would anybody have any questions? Yes, sir.
Two questions. Talk about your inspirations, and also talk about growing up in Brewer and how that brought you to the writer and observer you are.
As Mr. Booth says, I grew up in the Brewer community, which is the mecca of all civilization. You can't, if you're going to Los Angeles or New York, you've got to start out from Brewer. It's important. It's an important point on a map nobody ever drew. I had the good fortune to grow up at the heels of a whole collection of old men. Both of my grandfathers survived well into my mid-teen years. I had great uncles. I had great brothers-in-law and such, so that there was no shortage of geezers out puttering around doing something here or there. And they were very kind to take a young boy in tow and teach me what they knew. A lot of what I've turned out to be is due to that, but still, they meant well. I'm also an avid reader, and one of the first writers of any outdoor stuff that I came across is a character named Robert Rourke. He came out of the Second World War, where he served in the Navy, and looked for a way to fund his own adventures and be the center of attention. He was a wonderful writer and about as terrible a person as you could create, but his writing survives. And the upshot is he found fame as a syndicated columnist for newspapers in probably the golden age of newspaper writing. And he wrote the sort of provocative columns that made folks in a fury write letters to the editor. And it turns out that the madder people were made, the more they bought the newspaper. And he was in every paper in America. You can go through the old Daily Journal stuff in the library and find them. He did this in the 50s and 60s. Well, as part of that sideline, he wrote a lot of magazine articles, and he created a column for Field and Stream that he named The Old Man and the Boy. And he had grown up under the tutelage of one principal grandfather, but then had contribution from a host of others. And he combined them all into a character that he dubbed the Old Man. And I adopted that same device for mine. My old man is the amalgamation of 6 or 7 old men, some good and some not so good, but you can learn more from a bad example than a good example sometimes anyway. So my old men were industrious, and they were lazy, they were drunk, and they were sober. They never spent any time in jail I knew of, but they were the sort of mentors overall that it was a real joy to grow up at the heels of. And I've been able to borrow Rourke's literary device to tell stories of my own old men. I also grew up reading Pat McManus, who was an outdoor humor writer, passed away not long ago, but he wrote a column that landed on the back page of Outdoor Life for years. And his columns are all available in book form now. And I read them, but not just in passing. I would say I studied and continued to study how they do what they do. And ideally, in its best form, my writing is a reflection of the influence I gained from them. Any other questions? Ms. Zale.
So, do you think that the digital world will ever replace holding a book in your hand? And what's your favorite?
It varies. It varies. I enjoy holding a book, but I am a big devotee of the Audible app. I have maybe 175 titles on Audible on my phone that I can listen to while I'm standing in line at the post office or driving to work or anything like that. The physical book is probably already an anachronism of some degree, but I think there will always be some books, just because as long as there are readers, there'll be people who are interested in having a physical copy. But if you don't like reading print on a device like this one, you're not out of luck. There are many other ways to do it. So the fact that there is innovation applied to reading for fun and pleasure and education it's encouraging. Yes, sir.
Do you have or you think stuff on audio books or podcasts?
I do want to collect my columns into book form, and I'm hung up. I'm sort of an example of being afraid to try, because if I haven't tried yet, I haven't failed yet. But I want to make my collections of columns more than the sum of their parts, and figuring out how to weave them together in a way that makes a book that's stronger than the 20 columns that comprise it. I'm still working on that, but yes, sooner than later, ideally in the next year or two, I'm going to offer the books in collected form. I will probably offer them in print and audio. Yes, ma'am.
Will Avery or Walker have the love of the outdoors?
Walker has the love of the outdoors, and Avery has the love of reading. And between the two of them, I think maybe they've gotten some of the better of what parts of me that are good. Anyone else? Thank y'all so very much.